Welcome to Economic Deep Dive, where we break down the world's biggest financial events and hidden economic truths. In today's video, we explore the six-stage revolution cycle: France, Russia, Cuba, and why the USA appears to be entering stage 4. Get ready for a clear, powerful, and engaging deep dive that reveals how global markets, money systems, and real-world events truly connect. Stay till the end to understand the full story. Every revolution in history, whether it's France in 1789, Russia in 1917, China in 1949, Iran in 1979, or Cuba in 1959, follows a chillingly similar pattern. It's a cycle that starts quietly, almost invisibly, beneath the surface. Then it accelerates, destabilizes, and ultimately resets an entire nation's political and economic order. The players change, the leaders change, flags change. But the structure of collapse, rebellion, and regime transformation remains surprisingly consistent. And what makes this topic so urgent today is that many indicators suggest the United States is not at the beginning of this cycle. It is not even near the middle. It is dangerously close to stage 4, where the pressure becomes impossible to ignore, and societies begin to fracture from within. Stage 1 always begins with deep economic stress. Not the kind that shows up on headlines or 24-hour news, but slow, grinding inequality. It's when costs rise, wages stagnate, debt builds, and everyday people feel squeezed. In France, it started with massive national debt and rising bread prices. In Russia, it began with collapsing agricultural output and the economic burden of World War I in Cuba. Batista's corruption widened the wealth gap, while foreign corporations dominated local resources. Economists call this the silent stage, the moment when people feel something is wrong, but they cannot quite explain it. A society's frustration brews quietly. Trust begins to erode. Confidence in institutions starts to crack, but no one has yet taken to the streets. Stage 2 begins when the financial pressure transforms into political anger. People stop blaming price increases or food shortages and begin pointing fingers at leadership. Citizens lose faith in their elites, their government, and the fairness of the system itself. In France, this was the rise of the Estates General crisis. In Russia, distrust grew toward the Romanovs. In Cuba, Fidel Castro capitalized on rising dissatisfaction with Batista. At this stage, the ruling class appears distant, disconnected, or outright corrupt. Policies designed to stabilize the economy often backfire: tax increases, new regulations, unpopular reforms. Instead of restoring order, the government unintentionally accelerates distrust. This is the point where citizens say something must change. Stage 3 is when opposition movements form. It's not necessarily violent ones. It's at least not yet. These could be intellectual movements, underground groups, political challengers, or social coalitions. In France, it was the rise of the National Assembly. In Russia, it was the formation of the Bolsheviks and Mensheviks. In Cuba, it was Castro's July 26th movement gaining supporters across the island. These groups thrive because people seek alternatives, new voices who promise solutions the existing system cannot deliver. The more an elite class denies problems, the more these movements gain traction. Once they gain momentum, they start shaping public opinion. Society becomes polarized. Population splits into sides. Arguments intensify. And suddenly, the idea of radical change does not feel so radical anymore. It starts to feel inevitable. This brings us to stage 4, the most dangerous stage, and the stage many analysts argue the United States is entering right now. Stage 4 is the breakdown of trust and national unity. It is not yet revolution, not yet collapse, but the internal structure of a nation begins to buckle. People stop seeing each other as fellow citizens and start seeing each other as enemies. Media becomes polarized. Institutions lose credibility. Elections become contested. Violence becomes more common. Conspiracy theories flourish. The economy shows signs of instability, high debt, rising prices, declining real wages, and widening inequality. Historically, every nation at stage 4 reaches a moment where political compromise becomes impossible. Opposing sides no longer share the same facts, principles, or vision for the future. What used to be political disagreements transform into existential conflicts. And once a society reaches that point, history shows it does not simply snap back into unity. It moves forward. It escalates. Stage 5 is the ignition point. This is where revolt or revolution becomes unavoidable. It does not always begin with a dramatic event. Sometimes it is a protest, sometimes an economic shock, sometimes a disputed election, sometimes a major scandal. For France, it was the storming of the Bastille. For Russia, it was the February Revolution followed by the October Revolution. For Cuba, it was the guerrilla uprising reaching critical strength as Batista fled the country. Once Stage 5 begins, governments rapidly lose control. Power structures collapse, new factions emerge, and chaos becomes the defining feature of national life. It is at this point that new leaders rise from the ashes, charismatic figures, military leaders, populist candidates, or revolutionary groups. These leaders promise to restore order, rebuild the nation, and punish the elites who ruined everything. And whether they succeed or fail, the country never returns to what it was before. Stage 6 is the new order. A new government forms. A new political system emerges. Sometimes it is democratic, sometimes authoritarian, sometimes stable, sometimes short-lived. In France, the revolution eventually gave way to Napoleon. In Russia, the Bolsheviks established the Soviet Union. In Cuba, Castro's regime solidified into a one-party socialist state. In every case, the revolution reshaped the nation for generations. And the cycle, once complete, resets the economic and political foundations of society. It replaces old elites with new ones, new laws, new systems, new philosophies. And over decades, the pressure eventually builds against setting the stage for the next revolution. So where does the United States stand in this six-stage cycle? Many indicators suggest Stage 4, rising inequality, declining trust in institutions, extreme polarization, record national debt, widening divide between the political class and ordinary citizens, increasing skepticism toward media, corporations, and government officials, sharp generational divides, social fragmentation amplified by technology, melting confidence in the fairness of the system. No single event defines Stage 4. Rather, it is the accumulation of tensions, the slow unraveling of unity, and the rise of internal conflict. And in every historical case, once a nation enters Stage 4, it never returns to Stage 2 or Stage 1. It progresses forward, whether peacefully or violently, toward a major transformation. But there is something important to understand. Revolutions are not always destructive. They can lead to renewal, reform, and rebalancing. The United States has experienced cycles of upheaval before the Civil War. The Great Depression, the 1960s, and each time, the nation emerged different but still standing. The question today is not whether a transformation is coming. The question is what kind of transformation it will be. Will it be political, economic, cultural, peaceful, turbulent? No one knows, but the pattern of history is consistent. When inequality rises, when trust collapses, when polarization peaks, and when institutions weaken, societies move toward the ignition point. Stay till the end of this video, because understanding this cycle, its signs, its triggers, its outcomes helps us understand not just what might happen to the United States, but what has happened to every great nation before it. History does not repeat, but it does rhyme. And the revolution cycle is one of the clearest patterns in human civilization. If we understand it, we can prepare for what comes next.